Hey developers, building authentication for your ASP.NET Core app can be a pain. You've got to handle passwords, social login, two-factor auth, SSO for enterprise users, and there's always a risk of messing something up. But here's the thing, you don't have to build all this stuff from scratch. I'm going to show you how Descope can handle all the annoying authentication stuff for you. We're talking OTPs, magic links, Google login, and enterprise SSO. I'll walk you through exactly how to get it all working in your ASP.NET Core app. If you want to follow along, you'll need a free Descope account. You can create one using the link in the description, and .NET 6.0 or .NET 8.0 SDK installed on your PC. To start, I'll create a project in Descope and name it Descope ASP.NET Demo. I'll click Flows in the menu and then Start from Template. Here, I'll choose Passwords with Explicit Signup and click on Create. This generates a flow for us. A flow is a visual no-code builder for common user interactions like logins and signups. It handles the messy stuff like sessions and errors so you can focus on building the core features. This flow lets the user register an account or log in with an existing account using an email and password combination. If the user can't remember their password, an email OTP can help reset it. I'll take note of this ID as I'll need it in the code. Then I'll select Project from the sidebar and copy the project ID as I'll need this later too. Now I'll start working on the app. The complete app has been uploaded to GitHub, and you can find a link to it in the video description below. I'll create a new .NET app by running the command .NET new web app -o Descope test app. Then it's time to install the Descope SDK with the .NET add package command. In this video, I'll show you how to add authentication to a Razor Pages app using ASP.NET Core's cookie-based authentication system. Descope will handle the JWT validation on the back end, but we'll store the session in cookies, which is Microsoft's recommended approach for web applications. Don't worry though, if you prefer API-style token authentication for MVC controllers, the same Descope integration works there too. The GitHub repository contains a fully functional example of token-based authentication, including middleware to check JWTs on every request and an MVC controller to handle token refresh. Let's briefly take a look at how authentication works in ASP.NET Core applications. ASP.NET Core uses a claims-based identity system to keep user information consistent across your application. A claim is simply a piece of information about the user, like their name, email, or any custom attributes you want to store. When working with claims, you'll run into three main classes. A claim is a single piece of information about the user. Claims identity is a collection of claims that represent a single identity. And claims principal is a collection of identities, though usually it's just one. When a user is authenticated in your application, their information is stored as claims and can be accessed through the user property in controllers and Razor Pages. In appsettings.development.json, I'll paste my project ID in a key named Descope project ID. The app builder automatically loads this value when the app starts. In production, you'll want to store this in a secure location like an environment variable. To integrate Descope with ASP.NET Core, I'll replace the contents of program.cs with this code, which creates a Descope client with my project ID. The add singleton call registers the Descope client with ASP.NET Core's dependency injection. This means I can automatically inject the Descope client into any Razor page, controller, service, or middleware that needs it. Next, the call is to add authentication and add cookie-based authentication, which is how ASP.NET Core maintains user sessions. I'm setting cookies to expire after 24 hours and specifying the login page to redirect to when authentication is required. This option enables sliding expiration, which means the cookie's expiration time is reset with each request. Finally, the calls to use authentication, use authorization, and use middleware enable ASP.NET Core's authentication and authorization functionality. The order of middleware is important. Authentication must come before authorization. At this point, I've set up my application and enabled authentication. The next step is to create the middleware to validate the user's authentication status when they try to access a protected page. ASP.NET Core's middleware pipeline is a series of components that are called on every request to the app. Middleware components can perform tasks like authentication, authorization, and logging. I'll add a class named Authentication Middleware and add this code. Here, I'm initializing the middleware with the request delegate and the Descope client instance. These are passed into the constructor by ASP.NET Core's dependency injection system, so I don't need to worry about creating them myself. The middleware checks if the endpoint targeted by this request requires authorization. If it does, it ensures the user is authenticated. Otherwise, it continues to the next middleware. For each request that requires authentication, the middleware checks if the user has valid session tokens and validates them using the Descope SDK. Since the middleware calls validate and refresh session, it also refreshes the session if necessary. The middleware then updates the user's claims with fresh information from the tokens, which ensures the app always has current user data. This is particularly important when using features like RBAC, since the user's roles and permissions might have changed since their last request to a protected endpoint. Now, I'll create a login page that uses the Descope login web component to guide the user through the login process. The component delivers the user's session and refresh tokens to the app's backend, where they're validated and then used to sign the user in. I'll open pages/shared/_layout.cs HTML and add this code. This loads the Descope web component and the JavaScript SDK. Next, I'll add a file named login.cs HTML and add this code. Here, I'm loading the web component. I'll add my project ID and flow ID. This section of code handles what happens when the login is successful. I'm simply fetching the JWT and refresh tokens and submitting them to the backend. In www.root/css/site.css, I'll add some CSS to make it a little prettier. I'll add a file named login.cshtml.cs and paste this code. This code looks very familiar since it's very similar to the code used to validate and refresh the session in the authentication middleware. However, since this code manages the user's initial login, it saves the session token and refresh token within the user's claims. This allows the authentication middleware to use these tokens later to validate and refresh the session when the user returns to the app. To verify that authentication works, I'll add a protected route. I'll add a new file to the pages folder called protected.cshtml and add this code. Then I'll create protected.cshtml.cs and paste this code. Note the authorize attribute. This tells ASP.NET Core to require authentication for this page. Now let's run the app and see how it works. I'll open localhost:5273/protected, and as you can see, I'm redirected to the login page where I'll register an account and log in. Now I can access the protected page. I'll finish up by adding a page that lets the user log out. I'll add a new file to the pages folder called logout.cshtml and add this code. The user won't need to take any action on this page, just loading it logs them out. I'll add logout.cshtml.cs and add this code. It retrieves the user's refresh tokens from the user's claims and uses it to log the user out. By the time the user sees the logout message, their session has already been invalidated. Now that our login and logout works, let's look at some advanced features. Let's start with single sign-on, or SSO. ASP.NET is often used to build apps for enterprise users, which means you also need to support SSO. Descope makes working with SSO as easy as username and password login. In the Descope dashboard, I'll go to Getting Started and select Businesses. I'll choose SSO as the primary authentication method, and I'll choose one of these styles. I'll click Next, and Descope will give me sample code for my login component. This looks identical to the code I used when adding username and password authentication. The only difference is the flow ID, which I'll copy. Since SSL requires access to a SAML tenant, I could use a provider like Okta, but to keep things simple, I'll stick with mock SAML. I'll select Tenants and create a new tenant. I'll navigate to the Authentication Methods tab and enable SAML. Then I'll add example.com to the domain. I'll select Retrieve the connection details dynamically using a metadata URL and paste the mock SAML URL. Then I'll hit Save. I'll update the flow ID in the code and restart the app. As you can see, I can now sign in with SSO, so let's try it. And I'm signed in. Descope doesn't just handle authentication, it also offers user management widgets that you can insert into your app. Let's add a user profile widget to the ASP.NET app. I'll click on Widgets, then I'll click the User Profile widget and Show Code. I'll copy the web component code. I'll add a new file named profile.cshtml and paste the code. Then I'll add the page and model annotation. Finally, I'll update the version as mentioned in this comment. I'll create profile.cshtml.cs and paste this code. Then I'll run the app and go to the profile page. As you can see, this profile widget has been added, and if I want to, I can update my details here. By default, the Descope JWT includes all the user information that most apps need, but in some cases, you may need to add custom claims. For instance, you may want to specify which department the user works in. Thankfully, it's easy to add custom claims in Descope JWT templates, so I'll show you how to do that. I'll click on Project and select JWT templates. Then I'll create a new JWT template. I'll choose Default User JWT and I'll add a custom claim. I'll name it Domain and put the value user.emaildomain. This simulates a common scenario, a line of business app in a multinational corporation where employees' email addresses have different domains depending on which country they're based in. Having the domain as its own claim is useful because it gives you the ability to restrict access to pages based on the user's domain. For example, you can ensure that only users from the company's Canadian division with a .ca email domain can access the Canada Sales Portal page. I'll go to the Session Management tab and choose this new template as the user JWT. Then I need to update the login page and the Descope middleware page I created earlier to extract the custom claim and add it to the ASP.NET user's claims. I'll start with the login page. This line extracts the domain, and this line adds it to the claims. I'll do the same in the middleware. In program.cs, I'll create a policy that checks for a specific domain. Now, when I add an authorized attribute to a page, I can use this policy to restrict pages to users with a specific domain. And that's it. You now have an ASP.NET app with working authentication, SSO, a user profile widget, and a custom JWT template. Now you can take what you've learned and apply it to your own projects. Descope takes the complexity out of customer identity access management. Whether you're building a lightweight web app or a large-scale B2B platform, Descope scales with you. For more tutorials or developer news, don't forget to subscribe to our blog or follow us on LinkedIn.